The quiet man in the corner. The small café in Berlin was warm that afternoon. Outside, the city moved fast. Horns, chatter, the clatter of trams. But inside, everything felt calm. Old jazz played from a speaker in the corner, and sunlight spilled across wooden floors. People whispered softly, sipping coffee, typing on laptops. In one corner of the room by the wide glass window sat a man who looked like he didn't belong. He wore a simple black jacket, faded jeans, and old boots. His hair was slightly messy and his eyes were hidden behind dark sunglasses. Most people didn't notice him. But if they had looked a little closer, they would have realized they were sitting just a few feet from Keanu Reeves. Keanu had been in Berlin for a film shoot. He wasn't filming today. He had come to this cafe because he heard it had a quiet corner and good tea. What he didn't expect to find was a small chessboard set up at the center table, surrounded by a few young men laughing loudly, pointing at a handwritten sign next to it. The sign read, "Beat Felix, win free coffee for a week." Felix, AI, sharp-looking man in his 30s with slick hair and a mocking grin, was the self-declared chess master of the cafe. He ran a travel blog, talked fast, and loved attention. His friends gathered around as he beat one guest after another. Some tourists, some students, even a local teacher. Every time he won, he smirked and leaned back like a king on his throne. When Keanu walked in and sat quietly with his tea, Felix barely glanced at him. But then one of his friends noticed. "Hey, isn't that—" "Nah," Felix said, waving his hand. "Looks like him, but no way he'd be in here." Still, the whispers grew. Someone Googled an image. Someone else dared to ask for a photo, which Keanu kindly declined. He smiled softly, sipped his tea, and returned to watching the street outside. But Felix didn't like being ignored. "Hey, stranger," he called out across the cafe. "You want to play?" Keanu looked over. "Me? Yeah, you. I'll make it easy for you. I'll even let you have the white pieces. What do you say?" A few people chuckled nervously. Keanu hesitated, then slowly stood up. He walked over to the chess table, took a quiet breath, and sat down. "All right," he said. "Let's play." Felix laughed and rubbed his hands together. "You're in for a fun lesson, my friend." The cafe grew quiet. Even the jazz seemed to fade. Phones were raised, but Keanu didn't seem to notice. He was calm, his hands steady as he moved the first piece, pawn to e4. What no one knew was that Keanu had been playing chess since he was 10 years old. He had learned it from an old man who ran a repair shop near his childhood home. Chess had taught him patience, focus, and something more: how to read people without needing to say a word. Felix smiled confidently and mirrored the move. The opening seemed friendly, even casual. But soon, the match changed. Keanu played with a quiet strength. His eyes focused not just on the board but on Felix's body language, his hesitation, the slight shake of his hand when he saw a trap forming. 5 moves in. Felix frowned. 10 moves in. He shifted in his seat. By the 15th move, his friends had stopped laughing. A waitress leaned in to whisper, "He's actually really good." But it wasn't just skill. There was something graceful about the way Keanu moved each piece. No arrogance, no rush, just deep calm. It wasn't about winning. It was about something else. Felix tried to play aggressively, pushing his queen. Out early. Keanu didn't flinch. He responded with soft counters, letting the board unfold. The cafe had gone completely silent now. Every eye was on the board. Every ear was listening for the click of each piece. Then, on move 22, it happened. Keanu moved his knight. It was a quiet move, barely noticeable at first. But within seconds, Felix's face went pale. He stared at the board, blinked, and looked again. He had missed it, a simple fork. His queen and his rook were both under threat, and he could only save one. "You okay?" Keanu asked softly. Felix didn't answer. He made a move. It was desperate. Keanu replied with grace, not rushing, not showing pride. 3 more moves and Felix was cornered. Checkmate in 4. There was no way out. A slow gasp moved through the cafe. The jazz track had changed to something deeper, softer, almost like it knew what had just happened. Keanu leaned back slightly, nodded, and said, "Good game." Felix stared at the board, then looked up. For a moment he seemed like he was going to laugh it off, but instead, he stood up slowly, reached across the table, and held out his hand. "You're really good," he muttered. Keanu shook his hand and replied, "Thank you. You're not bad either." The crowd clapped quietly. It wasn't loud or wild. It was the kind of clap people give when they witness something respectful, something honest. The manager of the cafe came over and offered Keanu free coffee for a week. He smiled and declined politely. Maybe just one more cup of tea. Then something unexpected happened. A boy, no older than 12, came forward with a small notebook in his hand. He looked nervous. "Sir, can you teach me how you did that move?" Keanu smiled warmly. "Sure, let's take a look." He sat with the boy and began explaining the position slowly, using simple words. More kids came over, even some adults. Felix stood in the back, arms crossed, watching with a thoughtful look in his eyes. In that moment, no one saw a Hollywood star or a chess master. They saw something else. A man who gave his time, shared what he knew, and treated others with kindness and respect even when they tried to mock him. Outside, the city kept moving, but inside that little Berlin cafe, something had changed. A lesson had been taught, and Keanu hadn't needed to say a single proud word. Whispers of the board, the morning after the quiet storm in the Berlin cafe, a video clip started spreading across social media. It was grainy, filmed from a side table, but clear enough. It showed the final moves of the game between Felix and the stranger in black. The moment Keanu moved his knight, the soft murmur in the cafe, and the stunned look on Felix's face. Everything was captured in that short 30-second video. At first, people weren't sure it was really Keanu Reeves. The sunglasses and beard hid much of his face. But when someone else posted a clearer photo of him teaching the young boy afterward, the internet caught fire. Within hours, the hashtag #KeanuReeves started trending. What surprised people most wasn't just that Keanu had won. It was the way he played. Calm, quiet, focused. No pride, no mockery, just respect. By noon, the cafe had a line out the door. People came not just for coffee, but to sit at the same table, to see the board, to ask the staff. Was he really here? The cafe manager, an older woman named Greta, smiled warmly as she confirmed it for each guest. Yes, he came in quietly and left even quieter. But something powerful stayed behind. Meanwhile, across town, Felix sat in his apartment staring at the board he had set up on his dining table. The same move over and over, the knight, the fork, the quiet collapse of his pieces. He wasn't angry. He was something else. Unsettled. Felix had built his identity around being clever, quick, and dominant at the table. Chess was his language of control. But when Keanu played him, it felt different. Like the game wasn't about winning at all. That thought stuck in his mind. He opened his laptop and began reading more about Keanu Reeves. Not the movie roles, but the real man. Interviews. Stories of his kindness. The subway seat he gave up. The time he waited in the rain with a stranger. The money he quietly donated to children's hospitals. And then, something curious caught Felix's attention. An old article from a Toronto newspaper. It told the story of a boy named Keanu, who used to visit a small repair shop after school. The shop owner, Mr. Lasker, was a chess enthusiast. Keanu spent hours learning from him, not just about chess, but about life. In chess, Mr. Lasker once told him, "The board is silent, but if you listen with your heart, it speaks truth louder than words." Felix closed his laptop slowly. Then he opened a new browser window and typed, "Local Youth Chess Programs Berlin." Keanu, unaware of the storm his quiet match had started, returned to the same cafe 2 days later. He wore a hoodie this time and tried to be even more discreet. He ordered his tea and found the same corner seat, hoping for peace. But this time, something was different. A group of kids were seated at a nearby table, all huddled around a new chessboard. A woman guided them gently, pointing at pieces, letting them move and learn. and in the middle of them all was the same boy who had asked Keanu about the night move. When the boy noticed Keanu, his eyes lit up. He ran over and whispered, "Sir, we've been practicing every day. My teacher says I have good instincts. Now," Keanu smiled, leaned down and said softly, "Instincts matter, but kindness is the best move you'll ever make." The boy nodded, proud and determined. Greta, the cafe manager, came over and said, "They've been coming in since that day. Some don't even buy anything. They just want to play and learn. The cafe's never been this full of life." Keanu looked around. The old tables that once held laptops and silence now held kids, laughter, and pawns on the march. But then, something unexpected happened again. Felix walked in. He wasn't dressed as sharp as usual. He wore a simple sweater and carried a new chessboard under his arm. He walked over to Keanu's table, cleared his throat, and said, "Can we talk?" Keanu stood and offered him a seat. Felix sat down, eyes steady. "I watched the video, and I read about you. I also read about Mr. Lasker." Keanu's eyebrows lifted slightly. "I used to think chess was about being the smartest person in the room," Felix said. "But that day, you didn't just beat me. You showed me something I've never seen in a game." Keanu said nothing. He let the silence breathe. Felix continued, "I want to do better. I want to help teach. Give back. I brought this board for the kids. Maybe we could play again sometime. Or maybe you could help me build something more." Keanu smiled gently. "You don't need me for that, but if you build it, I'll come." Felix nodded, his face filled with something new, humility. From that day, the cafe became more than a coffee stop. It became a place of learning, laughter, and quiet reflection. Local artists painted the walls with murals of chessboards. Students dropped by after class. People of all ages took turns playing, winning and losing, but always with respect. Greta renamed the small corner of the cafe. She placed a hand-carved sign above it. "The quiet corner. Listen to the board." And, every now and then, when the cafe was quiet and the sun dipped low, Keanu would return, sometimes to play, sometimes to teach, and sometimes just to watch as the kindness he left behind kept moving forward like a well-placed knight in an open field. The invitation. A week passed, and the quiet chess corner at the Berlin Cafe grew, louder, not with noise, but with life. Every afternoon, more children came in. Some brought their own boards. Others came just to watch. Parents began joining in too, and even elderly guests returned with stories about the games they once played, long ago. It was no longer about winning. It was about learning. It was about connection. Keanu returned every now and then, always quietly. He never made an announcement. He never asked for attention. He simply walked in, sat down, and observed. Sometimes he'd play a game. Other times he'd help a struggling kid understand a move. People started calling him the silent teacher, and the kids? They started getting good. Especially one boy, Emil. The same boy who had asked Keanu to explain the night move. Emil had started studying old games at night. He watched tutorials, practiced with his grandpa, and even created his own little chess club at school. One afternoon, Emil handed Keanu a folded piece of paper. Keanu opened it, smiled, and read the neat handwriting. "Dear Mr. Keanu, we want to have a chess event in the park this Sunday. You inspired us. It's not a tournament, just a celebration. We'll bring our boards and sandwiches. Please, come Emil and friends." Keanu looked at Emil and nodded softly. "I'll be there." Sunday came. The sky was blue, the trees danced in the wind, and Berlin's Central Park was filled with laughter. Children ran around setting up small picnic blankets with chessboards placed at the center of each one. Some had handmade signs like, "Challenge us if you dare," or "Free game, friendly smiles." A few parents brought folding chairs. One man brought a guitar. A woman with gray hair handed out juice boxes to the children. The spirit of the day was light, pure, and full of joy. Then, just before noon, someone noticed a figure walking down the path. Black boots, soft steps, a gentle smile, Keanu had arrived, no sunglasses this time, no hoodie, just him. The kids clapped. Emil ran forward and pulled him toward the center blanket. They had saved him a seat. Next to it, they had even left a note that said, "Reserved for the night." Keanu laughed softly. "You all are too kind." He sat down and began playing, one game after another. Not once did he rush. Not once did he correct a child harshly. Even when someone made a poor move, he turned it into a lesson. "See here," he told a young girl, named Lena. "Your queen looks strong, but she's also alone, and being alone on the board is dangerous." "Just like in real life?" she asked curiously. Keanu paused, then nodded. "Yes. Even queens need support." By mid-afternoon, a small crowd had formed. Not just parents, but strangers passing by. Tourists took photos, some stayed to play, others just watched in amazement. And then, a man arrived. He wore a dark blue suit and sunglasses and had a serious look on his face. He walked slowly, observing everything. Emil noticed him and whispered to Keanu, "That guy looks like a bodyguard." Keanu turned his head slightly and smiled faintly. "He's not a bodyguard. He's a messenger." The man finally reached them, leaned down, and spoke quietly. "Mr. Reeves, your presence has been noticed. There's someone who wishes to speak with you. Privately." Keanu stood and followed the man to the edge of the park where a black car waited. Inside sat an older gentleman with white hair and a chest pin on his lapel. The man smiled warmly. "Mr. Reeves, I'm Victor Leisner, director of the European Youth Chess Foundation. Forgive the surprise visit." Keanu nodded. "How can I help you?" Victor looked out at the park. "We've followed your quiet work here. We've seen how you've turned a cafe into a sanctuary, how you've inspired children who had never touched a chess piece before. This movement, it's rare." Keanu said nothing. He just waited. Victor continued. "We would like to sponsor a citywide event. Not a tournament, but a celebration, modeled after what you've done here. We'll provide the boards, the space, even the food. All we ask is that you host it." Keanu looked down for a long moment. "I'm just a guest in this city," he said. "A quiet man in a corner." "Yes," Victor said with a smile. "But sometimes the quietest pieces change the whole game." Later that evening, as the sun began to set, and the last of the chessboards were packed away, Emil asked Keanu, "Do you think we'll do this? Again?" Keanu looked at him and smiled. "What do you think if we do something even bigger next time?" Emil's eyes lit up. "Really?" "Really," Keanu said, "but only if you help me." "I will," Emil shouted, already turning to tell his friends. And as the golden light of evening washed over the park, Keanu stood alone for a moment, watching the children run across the grass. He had come to Berlin for a film. He had found something else. Not fame. Not attention, but purpose. He smiled to himself and whispered the words Mr. Lasker once told him, "Listen to the board," because now the whole city was listening. Echoes in the city, the news spread fast. Within days of Keanu's quiet chess, gathering in the park, local newspapers picked up the story. They didn't focus on celebrity gossip or movie headlines. Instead, they told the story of how a soft-spoken man inspired an entire community, starting with a single chess match in a cafe. The headlines read, "The Night in Berlin, Keanu Reeves starts a quiet revolution." Not just a star, Reeves brings chess and kindness to Berlin's youth. Coffee, courage, and pawns. How one man changed a city corner, the city responded. Parents reached out to the cafe, asking how to enroll their kids in lessons. Teachers emailed Greta, offering to volunteer on weekends. Even elderly chess players who had long stopped playing dusted off their boards and offered to mentor the young ones. But the most surprising invitation came from Berlin's mayor. Keanu was sitting in the back garden of the cafe sipping warm tea and reviewing a game with Emil when Greta approached with an envelope in her hand. "You've got mail," she said, placing it on the table. Keanu raised an eyebrow. The envelope was heavy with an embossed seal. He opened it carefully. It was an official invitation. The mayor wanted to host a public event called Chess for Peace and asked Keanu to be the guest of honor and speaker. The idea was simple. Bring people from different backgrounds, neighborhoods, and even countries together through the game of chess. No speeches, no ceremonies, just people, pieces, and connection. Keanu took a slow breath and looked out at the street. He had never been comfortable standing on big stages, especially not for himself. But this wasn't about him. This was about the kids, about the message, about what was growing in that cafe corner and beyond. Preparations began. Victor Leistner, the European youth chess director, worked alongside the mayor's office. Greta allowed the cafe to become the planning hub. Volunteers came in daily. Local artists painted boards on wooden planks. Schools across Berlin were invited. Chess clubs from Poland, France, and even Turkey promised to send players. Felix, who had once mocked Keanu with a smirk and a challenge, now wore a different expression. He had become a full-time volunteer. Every morning, he cleaned the cafe floors, prepared the boards, and trained with the kids. He even stopped referring to himself as a chess master. "I'm just a student now," he told one curious tourist. "And my teacher doesn't speak much, but when he does, it changes everything." Keanu, true to himself, kept things simple. He refused cameras, interviews, or personal posters. His only request was that the event should have no hierarchy, just people side by side, face to face, piece to piece. The day of the event arrived. Berlin's central square was transformed into a giant chess plaza. Over 200 boards lined the area, each with two simple chairs. Large banners hung overhead with words painted by children. "Every move matters. Play with heart. Even the pawn can change the world." Families, students, travelers, and even retired soldiers gathered. There were no uniforms, no rules about rank or status. Everyone sat wherever they liked. Keanu arrived without announcement. He wore a plain jacket and a soft smile. He moved quietly, greeting the volunteers, hugging Greta and patting Felix on the back. Then he took his seat, one of many, and waited. A small boy from Bulgaria sat across from him. They didn't share a language, but the board didn't need one. They nodded to each other, and the game began. As they played, people watched not just because it was Keanu Reeves, but because of the way he played. Every move was thoughtful. Every pause was patient. When the boy made a mistake, Keanu didn't attack. He showed him what could have been done differently. The boy smiled and nodded, understanding not just the move but the lesson. The mayor approached later in the afternoon, gently tapping Keanu's shoulder. "Mr. Reeves," she said, "would you be willing to say a few words? Everyone's watching. They'd like to hear from you." Keanu stood up slowly. The square became still. He didn't walk to a podium. He didn't grab a microphone. Instead, he simply stepped onto one of the wooden benches and spoke softly, his voice carried by the wind. "I'm not a teacher," he said. "I'm not a master. I'm not even here to win." He paused. "I'm here because, like many of you, I believe that kindness is the best opening move." The crowd was silent, hanging on to every word. In chess, we face opponents, but across the board we also face ourselves, our pride, our fear, our patience. And when we choose respect over ego, something beautiful happens. He looked at Emil, who stood wide-eyed in the front row. "You don't need to be rich, famous, or perfect to change a life. You just need to sit across from someone and listen, even if no words are spoken." He stepped down quietly. No grand bow, no applause. Cue. But slowly, a ripple of claps spread across the square. Gentle, rising, honest. That day, Berlin didn't just host a chess event. It hosted a moment, a movement, a memory that would echo through every cafe, classroom, and living room for years to come. And at the heart of it all was a man who had once just wanted a quiet cup of tea. The game beyond the board, the Chess for Peace event, changed Berlin. Even after the tables were folded and the banners came down, something lingered in the air. Conversations were softer, strangers smiled more, and across neighborhoods, parks, and schools, New chess clubs began to form, not to crown champions, but to build bridges. Greta's cafe, once a quiet little shop near the tram line, had become something different. Locals called it the boardroom of kindness. It wasn't just about chess anymore, it was about stories. People came not only to play, but to share. Old musicians played soft tunes in the corner. A girl painted portraits in exchange for warm bread. A refugee father started teaching the kids how to play traditional games from his homeland, and every few days Keanu would return, never announced, never late. He'd walk in, nod at Greta, and sit quietly by the window with his tea. Sometimes he played. Sometimes he just watched. His presence didn't demand attention, it offered calm. But one afternoon something unexpected arrived, a thick letter with a red seal, delivered by hand. Greta received it, read it, and gently walked it over to Keanu. "You might want to see this," she whispered. He opened it slowly. Inside was an invitation, not from a city, not from a cafe, but from the World Chess Federation itself. They were organizing a global event in Geneva, a unity match, a symbolic game between nations, not political, not formal, just symbolic. And they wanted Keanu to represent the People's Board, a seat given not to grandmasters or professionals, but to someone who had used the game to build peace. Keanu put the letter down. "Why me?" he asked softly. Greta gave a small smile. "Maybe because you never asked for it." For the next few days, Keanu thought deeply. He hadn't played professional-level games in years. He wasn't interested in medals or fame. But the invitation wasn't about ego. It was about message. It was about showing the world that respect, patience, and listening could reach beyond screens and politics. He talked to Emil. "What do you think?" Keanu asked. Emil's eyes lit up. "You have to go. You'll show them how we play here. Not to win, but to care." Keanu smiled. "Then you'll be my coach." 2 weeks later, Keanu flew to Geneva. The Global Chess Unity event was being held in a historic hall, a place once used for peace talks. Now it held rows of boards, flags from over 40 countries, and players of all ages. Some wore suits. Others wore traditional robes or cultural clothing. Translators stood ready but soon found themselves unneeded. The board spoke louder than words. Keanu entered quietly, carrying a simple wooden board Greta had given him. Carved into its side were the words, "Play with heart, move with purpose." He was seated at the last table in the row, paired against a young woman from Ethiopia, named Zudi. She had a warm smile and a fierce focus in her eyes. She had taught chess to children in refugee camps. They greeted each other not with a handshake, but with a shared nod of respect. As they played, something magical happened. Cameras were everywhere, but no one was watching through screens anymore. They were watching with their hearts. Move after move, the two played not as competitors, but as partners in a silent dance. Every piece moved with care. No tricks, no traps, just truth. The match ended in a draw, and when it did, they both smiled, stood up, and bowed, not to each other, but to the people watching. The room erupted in gentle applause. Afterward, during the closing moment of the event, the host invited Keanu to say a few words. He hesitated, then stepped forward slowly. "Thank you for letting me sit at this table," he said. "I'm not a champion, not a professional, but I believe the smallest actions can echo the loudest. A pawn may move one square at a time, but if it keeps going, it can become anything." He looked around the room. "We don't need to speak the same language to understand each other. We just need to sit across from someone and choose respect." Back in Berlin, the cafe was full, again. Greta was baking more than usual. Emil was organizing a mini-tournament for kids under 10. Felix had printed little handbooks with tips on how to use chess to teach kindness. A television in the corner played a small news segment about the unity match. Keanu Reeves, the quiet actor turned chess ambassador, ends his symbolic game with a message the world needed to hear, the reporter said. Greta smiled and turned the volume down. He'd rather they watch the kids than the screen anyway. As the day faded and the cafe lights glowed warm, Emil stood by the window and spotted a familiar figure walking down the street. "He's back," Emil shouted. Keanu opened the door carrying a gift, a new chessboard carved with the names of every child who had played in the park. He placed it on the center table and said, "Let's make more moves." And just like that, Berlin's quiet knight returned to his corner. Not to be praised, not to be filmed, but to keep playing the one game that had already changed more lives than anyone had expected. Because for Keanu, it was never about checkmate. It was always about connection. The final move, the wind in Berlin had changed. It was late autumn now. The leaves that once danced around the cafe door now gathered in golden piles along the streets. But inside Greta's cafe, the warmth remained. Not just from the ovens or the steaming cups of tea, but from the spirit that had grown inside those walls. The chessboard at the center table was always in use, sometimes by kids, sometimes by travelers, sometimes by complete strangers who left the cafe as friends, and always, carved into the board, were those quiet words: play with heart, move with purpose. Keanu sat by the window sipping tea as he watched Emil set up a game with Lena, who had recently taught her younger brother how to play. He smiled to himself, remembering how only weeks ago these kids had never even touched a chess piece. Greta came over with a letter. This time, it was handwritten. No seals, no titles. Just simple words written in blue ink. "Someone left this. For you," she said. Keanu opened it and read, "Dear Keanu, you may not remember me, but you changed my life. I used to think chess was about winning, but watching you, how you play, how you treat people, showed me it's really about something more. After you left Geneva, I started a chess group in my village. We play outside under trees. Kids come from far away, some barefoot, some shy, but they come. Thank you for making the game feel like home. Zudi." Keanu closed the letter and held it gently. He stared at it for a long time, then folded it carefully and placed it inside his jacket pocket. Outside, soft snowflakes had begun to fall. A few days later, a surprising visitor walked into the cafe. It was Victor Leistner, the director of the European Youth Chess Foundation. He shook Keanu's hand firmly and said, "We've started a new program, and we'd like you to be the face of it." Keanu tilted his head. "What kind of program?" "We're calling it the 50 Board Project. We're placing handcrafted chess boards in 50 cities, one in each cafe, school, shelter, or library. Not just for games, but for connection. Every board will carry the same message and your story." Keanu looked at the children playing, at Felix giving quiet advice to a young girl, at Greta helping an old man with his coat. Then he turned back to Victor and said, "I don't need to be the face, but I'll help build it." Victor smiled. "That's why we asked you." The next month was a blur of letters, designs, and wooden boards. Volunteers from across Europe sent in ideas. Artists painted miniature scenes of parks, cafes, and shared moments onto the boards. And at the heart of each one, burned into the wood by hand, was one line: "Every move is a chance to care." On the day of the official launch, Berlin held a small ceremony, not with reporters or cameras, but with the people who had lived the story. Greta lit a small lantern outside her cafe and placed the very first of the 50 boards in a glass case near the window. Emil and Lena stood by, holding a ribbon made from torn scraps of cloth given by children from different countries. Each piece was stitched with a single word: hope. Keanu didn't speak at the ceremony. Instead, he sat at the board with an old man who had once fought in a war. They played slowly, laughing between moves, remembering how life, like chess, is made of small decisions, moments of pause, and the courage to keep going even when you're behind. As they played, a crowd gathered, not to watch, but to feel. A boy from Turkey asked Emil if he could join the chess club. A girl from Ukraine hugged Lena after a close game. And somewhere in the back, Felix wiped his eyes quietly. He turned to Greta and said, "I used to think a strong opening wins the game. But now I know. It's how you finish that matters." Months passed. The 50 boards were sent across cities. In each place, someone sat down, nervous, curious, hopeful, and began a game. They weren't trying to be famous. They weren't trying to win. They were just trying to connect. And somewhere, always watching quietly, always smiling, was a man in a black jacket, a warm tea in hand, and a heart that spoke louder than words. Keanu never bragged about what he did. He never claimed titles or asked for attention, because he knew that real greatness didn't sit on pedestals or stages. It sat across from you, moved slowly, and waited patiently for your next move. And sometimes, the strongest piece on the board was kindness.